The grocery store was almost empty that late autumn evening, the soft hum of the refrigerators mixing with the faint rustle of plastic bags. Outside, the Portland sky had already faded to deep gray streetlights, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Inside, Mark Dawson, a 38-year-old single father, waited in line with a modest basket of groceries. Beside him, his 8-year-old son Lucas clutched a box of his favorite cereal, as if it were treasure. When they reached the checkout, Mark's attention shifted from the conveyor belt to the young cashier. Her name tag read Hannah, but it wasn't her name that caught his notice, it was her hands. They trembled so badly she nearly dropped the scanner. This wasn't the jitter of too much caffeine or the shiver of a cold room. This was something deeper: fear, stress, maybe both. Mark, a former firefighter, who'd seen more than his share of human pain, knew the look in her eyes. It was the same look he'd seen in people trapped in burning buildings, the silent plea for someone to notice before it was too late. He asked gently if she was all right, but Hannah forced a thin smile and murmured something about being tired. Still, her gaze kept flicking, almost involuntarily, toward a glass-walled manager's office across the store. As Lucas cheerfully offered to lend Hannah his jacket, Mark felt a knot tighten in his chest. He didn't know what was wrong yet, but one thing was certain. This wasn't just about being tired, and he couldn't in good conscience just pay for his groceries and walk away. Mark slid his card through the reader, his mind no longer on the total flashing across the screen. Hannah's forced chuckle at Lucas' offer barely disguised the tension in her face. Her eyes darted again toward that office, just a fraction of a second, but enough to confirm that whatever was wrong had a name, and likely sat behind that glass. He thanked her, took the bagged groceries, and started toward the exit, Lucas skipping at his side. But halfway to the door, something made him stop. Through the reflection in the glass, he saw Hannah lean against the counter for just a heartbeat, as if her knees might give way. Then the office door swung open. A stocky man in his 40s stepped out, his voice low but sharp. Even from across the store, Mark saw the way Hannah stiffened, her shoulders locking like a soldier under inspection. Mark's instincts screamed that this was no ordinary workplace stress. Not with that flinch, not with that look in her eyes. He walked Lucas out to the car, buckled him in, and called his sister. "Can you watch him for a bit? I've got something I need to check on." 10 minutes later, with Lucas safely at his aunt's house, Mark was back inside the store. Hannah's line had cleared. He approached slowly, lowering his voice so no one else could hear. "You've been looking toward that office all night. If there's something wrong, you can tell me." Her lips parted, then closed. I can't." She gripped the counter until her knuckles whitened. "It's him," she whispered, flicking her eyes toward the office. "My manager. He harasses me, touches my shoulder when he walks by, stands too close, says things no one should say at work. When I told him to stop, he cut my hours." Mark felt the familiar burn of anger rise in his chest. He'd seen bullies before in firehouses in the world, and had never been one to turn away. Hannah's voice was barely above a whisper, but every word carried the weight of 6 months of fear. "I need this job," she murmured, her eyes shimmering. "My rent's overdue. If I push him again, I'll lose everything." Mark's jaw tightened. He remembered nights after his wife passed, staring at stacks of unpaid bills, feeling the world closing in. That helplessness had nearly broken him. He recognized it now in Hannah's trembling hands. "I'm not going to cause a scene," he assured her, "but I'm also not going to walk away knowing this is happening." Her head shook quickly. "Please don't. It'll only make things worse." Mark leaned in, his voice steady. "Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the right thing even when you are." She looked at him for a long moment, her lip quivering, then glanced back toward the office as if expecting the manager to appear at any second. "What if no one believes me? Then they'll have to deal with me," Mark said simply. "I've seen men like him get away with it because people stay silent. Not this time." Hannah swallowed hard. then gave the smallest of nods. Mark motioned toward the break room door. "Let's make the call together." Inside the cramped space, Hannah's hands trembled as she dialed the corporate HR number. Mark sat beside her, his presence calm but unyielding. When a representative answered, Hannah's voice wavered at first, but then steadied as she recounted every detail, the comments, the lingering touches, the retaliation through cut hours. She named the manager, gave dates, explained how she'd been too scared to speak up until now. The HR rep listened carefully, promised an investigation, and told her she wouldn't have to work her next shift until the matter was resolved. Relief and terror warred in Hannah's expression. Relief for finally speaking up, terror for what might come next. When they stepped back into the store, the manager was waiting near the registers, his arms crossed. "What's going on?" he demanded. Hannah's voice shook, but she straightened her back. "What's going on is that I've reported you." The man's face went pale. You can't!" She cut in, surprising even herself. "And I did." Mark stepped forward, his tone low, but lethal. "If I hear you so much as look at her the wrong way again, you'll have more than HR to answer to." The manager's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He turned away. Hannah let out a shaky breath. "I can't believe I just did that." "You did," Mark said, with a small, proud smile. "And you're stronger than you think." 2 days later, Mark was making breakfast when his phone buzzed. The caller ID showed Hannah's name. "Hey," he answered, bracing himself for bad news. But her voice was lighter than he'd ever heard it. "They suspended him, Mark. HR called me this morning. He's gone pending a full investigation, and they offered me extra hours at another location." Mark felt a smile tug at his lips. "That's great news. How are you holding up?" Still a little shaken, she admitted. "But I feel like I can breathe again. I wouldn't have done it without you." Mark glanced towards the kitchen table where Lucas was coloring, oblivious to the conversation. "You did the hard part," he said. "You told the truth." Later that afternoon, as Mark picked Lucas up from school, the boy asked from the back seat, "Daddy, is that lady okay now?" "Yes, buddy," Mark replied, catching his son's curious eyes in the rearview mirror. "She's okay now because she stood up for herself. Sometimes people just need someone to stand beside them, to find their courage." Lucas thought about that for a moment before nodding, as if filing it away for the future. That evening, Mark replayed the past few days in his mind. It struck him how close he'd come to walking out of that store, convincing himself it wasn't his business. He knew the world was full of quiet injustices, moments when people looked the other way because they didn't want to get involved. But this time, he hadn't turned his back. A week later, Hannah stopped by the firehouse where Mark volunteered part-time. She brought a small box of cookies Lucas had mentioned liking. "A thank you," she said shyly. "You don't owe me anything," Mark told her. "Maybe not," she said, "but you reminded me that I matter, and that what's happening to me matters." Mark accepted the box with a nod. "You do matter. Don't forget that." As she left, Mark realized the whole thing had started with a single, simple question. 3 little words that most people toss out without thinking. "Are you okay?" Yet, in that moment, those words had cracked open the silence Hannah had been living in for months. And for Mark, it was a reminder that sometimes the difference between someone sinking or standing tall was simply having another person refuse to walk away. The following Saturday, the rain had settled over Portland in a steady silver curtain. Mark and Lucas were at their favorite corner cafe sipping hot chocolate and watching the world blur past the window. Lucas was busy building a marshmallow tower when Mark's phone buzzed with a text from Hannah. "I just wanted you to know things are better. The new store feels safe. My hours are back, and I'm even getting training for a supervisor position." Mark smiled, typing back a quick congratulations. But as he set the phone down, he thought about how much had changed in such a short time. Not just for Hannah, but for him, too. Before that night at the grocery store, he'd been caught up in the quiet grind of single fatherhood work bills, bedtime routines. He'd told himself he didn't have room to take on someone else's battles, but seeing Hannah's trembling hands and haunted eyes had reminded him of something he'd learned in the fire service. Sometimes you have to step into the flames for someone else when they can't do it alone. Lucas looked up from his marshmallow tower. Daddy, do you think she'll be happy now? I think she already is, Mark said, because now she knows she's not alone. That's something everyone needs. Lucas tilted his head thoughtfully. Like when you hold my hand in the dark. Mark's throat tightened a little. Exactly like that. When they left the cafe, the rain had softened to a mist. Mark slipped his jacket over Lucas' small shoulders and pulled the hood up. Walking to the truck, he realized that what happened with Hannah wasn't just about stopping a bully. It was about showing Lucasby example that standing up for someone is worth the discomfort, the risk, and even the fear. Back home, as Lucas disappeared into his room to work on a Lego masterpiece, Mark sat by the window, watching the rain bead against the glass. The world was full of people like Hannah people, just trying to get through the day carrying invisible burdens. And it was also full of people like that manager, willing to exploit someone's silence. Mark knew he couldn't fix everything, but he could notice. He could ask. He could care enough to stay when walking away would be easier. And maybe, just maybe, that was how the world started to change. One small act of courage at a time. A few evenings later, Mark was tucking Lucas into bed when the boy asked Daddy, "Will we see Hannah again?" Mark smiled, smoothing the blanket over his son. "I think so, buddy. People like her, they don't disappear from your life once you've been through something big together." Lucas yawned, already drifting. "I'm glad you didn't just walk away that night." Mark paused, feeling the truth of those words settle in his chest. "Me too." He turned off the light, leaving the door cracked just enough for the hallway glow to slip in. Downstairs, Mark sat with a cup of coffee, reflecting. Helping Hannah hadn't changed the whole world, but it had changed hers. And it had reminded him in a way he'd almost forgotten that courage often begins with a choice to notice, to care, and to act. Sometimes the greatest impact we can have comes from moments that feel small, asking a simple question, offering to stand beside someone, or refusing to ignore what's wrong. You never truly know how much strength your presence can give to another person. Kindness is powerful, and silence often protects the wrong side. If this story moved, you take a moment to share your thoughts below. Have you ever stepped in when someone needed help or wished you had? Your experience might inspire someone else to act. And if you believe in spreading stories of courage and compassion, hit subscribe so we can keep sharing moments that remind us one person's voice can make all the difference.